What's up, everyone? It's Execution Double Nine here, and now that I am nearing almost 100 hours on Diablo 4 according to Xbox, I wanted to go ahead and give my thoughts in a quick little review. So, to start off, so that you guys know where I'm coming from, I want to give a little bit of my background with Diablo. I did play the original Diablo back in the days when it was first released. I didn't particularly care for it too much. It was a little too slow going for me, so I never really got into it. But to the surprise of all of my friends, when Diablo 2 came out, I was really hyped for that. So I did get Diablo 2. In fact, I did get the collector's edition of it, and I did play Diablo 2, although I never got super deep into it. I think the furthest I ever got was like I beat the storyline one time on normal mode, but I never did Nightmare. I never did Hell. I never did any of the in-game grinding or anything like that. I didn't realize that was a big thing about the game or anything like that. So I never got into it too much. So Diablo 2 for me actually doesn't hold a lot of nostalgia because I didn't have those experiences with it back in the day that most people in the Diablo 2 community would have. So when Diablo 3 came out, I was interested but not super hyped about it. So I didn't actually get into Diablo 3 until later. I think it was after Reaper of Souls even when I started getting into that game. And so I missed the real money auction house. I missed all the stuff from launch and everything that a lot of people didn't like. So I came in when apparently Diablo 3 was considered good, and I really liked it. In fact, that was the first time that I realized that there was this in game to Diablo. As I cleared through the campaign and started getting into greater rifts and everything like that. And I really enjoyed that concept of pushing greater rifts higher and higher and higher and collecting better and better gear to keep pushing myself higher and higher and higher. So I started to get really into Diablo 3 for a little bit, and it kind of opened me up to the more like looter kind of games, ARPGs and stuff like that. So whereas most people probably got into this series and this genre from Diablo 2, for me it was actually Diablo 3. And it did bring a point where I started to get interested in, I kind of want to go back and check out Diablo 2 like that. Even though Diablo 3 is the game that I got deeper into, I always still kind of preferred Diablo 2. I liked a lot of the character creation and development and stuff, the skill trees and everything. I really did like that part about Diablo 2, so I started to get interested into going back to it, and then that's when I found out, oh, Diablo 2 Resurrected is coming out. So I was able to get that game at launch, and playing Diablo 2 Resurrected with kind of new open eyes about what the game and the genre had to offer, it was like a whole brand new experience. And for me, Diablo 2 instantly became like an all time favorite game for me. And I still love it. Granted, I probably don't have 20 years of burnout like a lot of people do. So for me, it's actually still kind of fresh. Um, but I until Diablo 4 came out, I was playing every season on Diablo 2 Resurrected. I played seasons 1, 2, and 3. I'm not playing 4 because that coincided with the launch of Diablo 4. And so I wanted to spend my focus there. But yeah, just Diablo 2, going back to Diablo 2 Resurrected, really kind of changed my outlook on what the Diablo series had to offer. So I still maintain that Diablo 2 is my favorite of the franchise, and that does not change with the release of Diablo 4. But I will say, and I'll go ahead and put this up front, I think Diablo 4 is a really good game, and this is going to be a positive review. I give that up front because I would like to give people an opportunity to avoid spoilers, and so I'm going to put any spoilery type of stuff in terms of like story, campaign, stuff like that, I'm going to put that towards the end of my review. But just so you know what you're getting into, this is a positive review of Diablo 4. I think it's a really great game. I think it's definitely a really good base to start off with that it can continue to build upon as the months and years go on and seasons come and go and they add more content to it. I think that it's a really good game, not perfect by any means. There's a reason why Diablo 2 is still probably my favorite in the franchise, but I think it's a really good game with a lot to offer. So that's a little bit about my background with Diablo and a little bit about where I'm at with Diablo 4. So with that, we can go ahead and get into some more of the specifics. Now, for myself, the most important part of any game is going to be the gameplay, and that's probably true for most people, most gamers. But when it comes to my list of importance, it's gameplay number one. I don't really care about story so much. In fact, story is probably the lowest on my kind of tier list of what makes a good game for me. For me, I'm not so much worried about taking part in someone else's story. I like a game where I can build up my own character and make my own story. So the storyline in a game is probably the least important thing to me. And gameplay is very important to me. So, with that said, I love the gameplay overall in Diablo 4. When it comes to the actual combat, I think it's really well done overall. My biggest complaint with the combat, and this is one of the reasons, one of the big reasons why Diablo 2 remains my preferred game between the two for me, is I'm not a fan of the builder spender dynamic when it comes to skills that build your resource and then skills that spend it. I feel that it slows down combat a little bit more. It takes you out of your routine, it takes you into your flow. I would much rather take Diablo 2 style where let me use my abilities as much as I want, and when I run out of my resource, mana or whatever it is, I just pop my mana potions and rebuild it back up. That way I can stay in the same flow of my abilities that I'm using, my rotations, things like that. I feel that the spender builder dynamic kind of breaks me out of that rotation. It kind of breaks me out of that flow. And so it makes it more challenging, I guess. It makes it the combat less fluid. That being said, there do end up being lots of ways to end up generating resource. So in the long term, it ends up being a minimal deal. So for instance, as me, I'm playing a necro. And so I can just kind of hold down my trigger buttons to pop my corpse explosions or pop my skeletal minions and constantly regenerate my essence. Well, and that way I can keep using my spender abilities pretty consistently and without much interruption. So there are ways of getting around it, but it's not my ideal form of gameplay. I would probably rather not have to hold down a trigger button to pop all my corpse explosions and summons and stuff constantly. But it's clearly not the worst dynamic because I do really enjoy the gameplay. I'm having a really good time with it. But I just kind of prefer the old way of just give me my mana pots. Let me go ahead and just keep refilling my resources as I need it, and let me just keep using the abilities that I want to use. I mean, after all, that's the whole reason why I'm building my character. I'm building it in a certain way because I want to play it a certain way, and that's what I want to be able to use. So that's kind of where I feel when it comes to the combat part. It's good, but it's not. I feel that other Diablo games, particularly Diablo 2, have done it better because Diablo 3 also had that same kind of system with the builder spenders and all of that stuff. Obviously, the other important part for me, as I kind of talked about, is the skill tree system. That's where I get to make my character what I want it to be. And in terms of Diablo, I still think Diablo 2 has the best skill tree system. In fact, when it comes to necromancers, which are always my favorite class, it doesn't matter what game I'm playing, the Diablo 2 version of a necromancer is one of my favorites in all of gaming. I really love the skills and the abilities and everything, and the aesthetic and the dynamic that they have. I really love the way Necros work in Diablo 2. And Diablo 4 brings it closer to that. There were certain things about Diablo 3's Necromancer that I didn't like. Um, Actually, from kind of my time watching YouTube videos and build guides and reviews and being in the like Reddit communities and stuff. I guess apparently I'm one of the only ones like this, but I actually prefer Diablo 4's minions where you actually have to actively summon them, same way as in Diablo 2. I didn't really like the Diablo 3 version where they were automatically summoned. I felt like I had less control over them, and building my own armies. I did like the command skeletons ability where you could focus them on certain targets and stuff. So something like that is certainly missing from the Diablo 4 skill tree. Um, but overall, I think the skill tree is good. I think it lacks just a little bit from some of the choices and the options that Diablo 2 gives. Particularly in the ways I guess Diablo 2 has their own version of this as well, where you have to have a point in a certain tree or a certain skill to be able to move on to the next part of the tree and stuff like that. And Diablo 4 has their skill tree where you have to have like 2 points in your primary skills before you can move on to core, and then like you have to have like 3 or 4 or whatever it is to move on to the next, and so you have to have certain amounts of points preemptively before you can move on. And then it makes it difficult when you want to do respecking, because then you have to start taking points from further skills in the tree to be able to take points away from the earlier ones and stuff. And it can kind of become a little bit of a mess. It's not a huge deal, because especially once you get to level 50 and you have so many skill points, you're gonna have skill points in the passives, and building up your skills and everything, so it won't become so much of a problem to start respecking and moving around and everything. But I just feel it's a little bit more on the tedious side than Diablo 2's, which is just kind of really straightforward. It's a little bit easier. I guess for me, it's a little bit easier to just spend a point in a preemptive skill, rather than having to spend some of your limited skills, like 2 or 3 or whatever it is, in a certain tree that I might not even be all that interested in. Like, for example, I don't use curses in my build. I've tried them, and I actually don't think there's anything wrong with them, but I personally, I don't use curses in my build, but I have to have a certain amount of points in that section. Now there's other abilities there and stuff, some of the passives and stuff that I can use to fill up that spot, but I don't know, it just seems kind of tedious. And I think maybe that's kind of where it is for me, is that if I'm playing Diablo 2, if I want curses, there's an actual curse tab. There's an actual separate curse skill tree, and then I can invest in curses as much as I want, and there might be preemptive skills that I have to take before I can take some of the higher level ones, but it's its own separate thing. If I don't want curses, if I want to focus on bone skills or summoning skills or whatever it is that I want to focus on in Diablo 2, I don't have to put points into curses. Whereas in Diablo 4, the way the tree works is those tabs now, those separate skill trees that Diablo 2 has, are now part of your path. So you would have to take bone skills or summoning skills or curse skills to get onto the next ones if we were using Diablo 2's like skills but in a Diablo 4 layout, then that would be saying I have to take amplified damage before I can take bone spear. And so something like that, I guess it just doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not as intuitive for me. So I don't think it's a bad skill tree by any means, and I actually much prefer it over Diablo 3, where you just unlock everything and then you just swap in whatever abilities and runes that you want on the fly. I do like this where it's like I can specialize in whatever abilities that I want to have and whatever I want my character to be, I can specialize in that. So I think it's an improvement over Diablo 3, but it doesn't quite reach all of the things that I liked about Diablo 2. And the Paragon board is much the same way of that. Now I'm only level 62 at the time of this video that I'm making here. So I still have a long ways to go in the Paragon board. But I also think, again, it's an improvement over Diablo 3, because one thing I noticed in Diablo 3 is that if you play long enough, if you level up high enough, you're always going to just max out everything. There's no real specialization to your builds or anything. It's nothing that makes your build set apart from somebody else's or anything like that. You're just going to have access to every skill, every rune, and then your Paragon board is going to be completely maxed out in every single little category there. Whereas the Paragon boards in Diablo 4, there's different boards for you to pick and choose from, and then how you rotate them and how you build through them. My board is going to look completely different from your build or your board, and it's going to look completely different from your friend's board, even if we're all playing the same class. Now, I'm speaking in this review mostly about necromancers because that's what my 100 hours has been so far, although I did get some experience with druids and sorks in the beta. I only got those up to level 25, obviously. I did dabble with a rogue for a little bit as well, but not as long. But basically what I'm speaking from today is going to be from the necromancer perspective. I haven't given the other classes the same kind of experience that I've gotten from the necromancer so far. But there's 8 different boards to choose from, so you're not going to be able to access all 8 of them, so you're specializing your build in that way. The way you go through the boards is going to be specialized to you, not from someone else. So I really like that aspect of it. It gives you an opportunity to really make your character your own, and that's something that I felt was missing from Diablo 3, and that's one of the that probably is the major thing that I look for when it comes to RPGs, is what kind of freedom do I have to individualize my build, my character, to make it play the way that I want it to, and to set it apart from somebody else's build. And so I really like that aspect of Diablo 4, and I think that's one of the things that they did really well in this case. Next up is the content, which is where I think Diablo 4 really, really shines. When it comes to the 1 through 50 experience, I really cannot believe the amount of content that this game has. It While I don't consider this game to be an MMO, this is one area where the MMO aspects impact the game in what I feel to be a positive way. I know the MMO term is kind of toxic for a lot of people, but for me, I actually kind of like, at least conceptually, the idea of MMOs, although I think a lot of MMOs don't hit the mark, but that's a whole other issue. But in this case, one of the things that I think this online live service model, MMO kind of open world thing that has going on really benefits is just the amount of content that this game has. Whether it's the 1 through 50 going through the campaign, or even I kind of like the in-game content that's there. I know there seem to be a lot of complaints through the community about that, but we'll get to the in-game stuff in a little bit. First, for me, the 1 through 50 experience, there is so much content. The number of side quests, is just incredible. When I first started this game, I wanted to do kind of more of a slow play. I wanted to do the side quests in all the different areas and stuff as I was going through the main quest and feel like I was getting a full Diablo 4 experience. And then I found that I was like level 30 or 40 or something like that before I even got out of Act 1. Because there was just so much to do. And so that's the reason why I was post 50 by the time I even finished the campaign. So I got into in game a little bit late. But the number of side quests that are there, and for me they're actually fun to do. They're worth doing because so many of them are to send you to different dungeons, which is what you're going to be doing anyways, and there's actual rewards to doing these dungeons. I'm experiencing the kind of gameplay content I want from Diablo, which is go into dungeons and just kill a ton of monsters and then get rewards for it. And afterwards, I'm getting those rewards because I'm going into these dungeons which give me aspects, and of course, not all of them are going to be for my class, but eventually I'm going to make a druid, I'm going to make a sork, I'm going to make a rogue, I'm going to make a barbarian, I'm going to make all these classes eventually. And so now I have these aspects to help build them up the way that I would like. So the side quests for me were very engaging and very rewarding. Sometimes the stories could drag on a little bit, and there were some chains that started to drag on a little bit, but most of them are efficient, they're quick, they get you to where you want to. They get you to content that you want to be doing. So I really enjoyed the side quests in it. Plus, you get the renowned experience and everything for doing the side quests as well. And renowned is a big part because of all the rewards that you get from it, whether it be gold, skill points, obols, potions, or later on Paragon points. The renown rewards are really important as well. And for as tedious as renown can be, at least doing dungeons through these side quests and getting renowned for it, at least that's more of an organic way of building it. So for me, that's probably the most organic, funnest way of being able to build renowned. The events are really fun. They do get repetitive, but repetition, that's kind of what Diablo is. So the world events, there's a certain number, certain types of events, and so when you go to these events, it kind of like, I feel like it randomly picks one, or maybe each event is the same one over and over again, and it's just that these same types of events are strewn throughout the world. But at least it breaks it up a little bit. I've always kind of liked world event type stuff in MMOs, world bosses, things like that, because it's, to me, it's fun. There's usually a little bit of a heightened challenge there, although the world events in Diablo aren't exceptionally challenging and can be soloed like 99.999% of the time. But typically speaking, they offer a little bit of an extra challenge and something to do with other players in the community. The events in Diablo 4 aren't necessarily challenging, but it does give you something to do that other players might be a part of as well, and just kind of a nice little opportunity to go through hordes and waves of enemies and get some rewards for it. Um, I'm happy with the world events. As the game goes along and there's more seasons and more content updates and everything, I would certainly love to see more variety in that. But as it is now to start off with, I think it's a good addition. We talked about dungeons a little bit. Whether it's for a side quest or not, you can always go into these dungeons. Cellars are kind of like, mini dungeons. Go through, kill a quick wave of enemies, and then you're done. And then one of the better ones is probably the Legion events. Those aren't quite the world bosses, but it's definitely a nice group activity to just go through, take out waves and waves of enemies, get some good rewards and stuff. So those are really fun events to take care of as well. So I feel like 1 through 50, there is tons and tons and tons of content to go through. Like, you're never going to be running out of content when it's 1 through 50. But of course, for most Diablo gamers, it's not about 1 through 50. That's not the reason why we play Diablo. We play Diablo for the end game, and that's where people are really looking for the content to see what it's like there. You'll find some reviews and some people in the community and stuff that seem to have a problem with the end game. Maybe it's because I'm only level 62. Maybe it's because I haven't gotten to World Tier 4 yet. Perhaps my opinion can change later on. But as it stands right now, I do enjoy the end game content that we have. I think Nightmare Dungeons are fun. The fact that it's there, this is almost like the Diablo 4 version of Greater Rifts. You do them, you get the higher level sigils, and you're continuously going up and up and up and up and up in challenge and rewards. That's the main end game. It's like the Greater Rifts of Diablo 4. It's, to me, the most engaging in game. Nightmare Dungeons I find really fun. The fact that also when you're in these dungeons, you have the different affixes that change what's happening in the dungeon. It gives a little bit of variety. It gives a little bit of replayability to it. Plus, those world events that we talked about, a lot of those happen in these dungeons as well. And yes, they get repetitive, but at least it gives a little bit more life to the dungeon. So I think as this game goes on and we get more of a variety in what kind of events there are in this game, there can be even more variety within these Nightmare Dungeons. So for me, I think it's a great starting point where these Nightmare Dungeons are at. There's something that I'm always working towards further and further and further. And because every time you go into a Nightmare Dungeon, you're probably going to get at least one, if not more, sigils to pick up, and oftentimes those are going to be a higher level than what you cleared, so you're going to have an opportunity to keep going up further and further and further. Plus, with the crafting that's done in there, you're going to be able to build higher and higher sigils to do the levels that you want to do. In fact, I just did one the other night where I've been clearing Nightmare Dungeons super easily without much resistance. So I crafted a Nightmare Sigil that was 8 levels above what I had been able to clear. The highest I had been able to clear at the time was a 10, and I crafted a Nightmare Sigil that was an 18. So I went and I tried it, and I started off doing pretty good, but then I ended up getting my ass kicked. And so it gave me something, motivated me something, that's something to work towards. Like, there's still things in my build to continue leveling up, because the things in the Nightmare Dungeon were like 10 levels higher than me. I was like level 61, and they were the 72, so 11 levels. And it gives me something to work towards, and I can also see where that success will be, because I was doing a pretty good job for the most part for about the first half of the dungeon. Then when I got to the second half, things started to pick up. I'm facing more elites and champions and stuff, and so it was something that my build just kind of ended up fizzling out. And makes me think, okay, are there changes that I can make to my build to be able to do higher level content? Do I just need to level myself up? It gives me things to work towards. So I was actually very happy with the Nightmare Dungeons, and I'm very much enjoying this content. Now, one thing I will say about Nightmare Dungeons, and this kind of goes back to the same things we talked about with like world events and stuff like that, is that yes, it's repetitive. It is the same thing over and over and over again, but when you look at the series, that's what Diablo is. I mean, Diablo has always been repetitive. Greater Rifts were repetitive. It was the same thing over and over again, just with a higher difficulty level. Diablo 2, the in-game content that you were doing there, Bale runs, cow runs, things like that, it was all repetitive. It didn't matter what it was, it's all repetitive content, and that's just what Diablo is. It's repetitive by nature. So for me, with Nightmare Dungeons being repetitive, yes, they are repetitive, and eventually you're going to burn out on it, because you can only do the same thing for so long before you just kind of burn out on it. But to me, that's not necessarily a negative to the game. unless it's a negative on the franchise as a whole, unless it's a negative on the genre as a whole, I don't think it's fair to hold it against Diablo 4 that nightmare dungeons are repetitive, but then praise Diablo 3, praise Diablo 2, praise Path of Exile, praise any of these other games where it's all repetitive. It's all repetition. That's just what the genre is. That's what the franchise is. So you accept it as what it is, or you don't, or whatever, but it just is what it is, and it's part of the Diablo experience. But unlike in the past, unlike Diablo 2, where it was Baal runs, Mephisto runs, Chaos Sanctuary runs, Cal runs, Pits runs, where it was just those same things over and over again, or whether it was Diablo 3, where it was Greater Rift, Greater Rift, Greater Rift, Greater Rift, Diablo 4 has other things to do. Now, some of these things we can see inspiration coming from other parts of the Diablo franchise. Like Tree of Whispers is very reminiscent of the bounty system in Diablo 3. And you do Tree of Whispers, that's how you get your first sigils to start doing Nightmare Dungeons. There's gear that you can get in the caches that you get as rewards. So Tree of Whispers seems very much influenced by the bounty system, but it's fun. It gives you a bunch of different locations on the map that you can go to, and each one gives you a certain amount of grim rewards, and you can use those to, well, after you fill up your tin, you go back to the Tree of Whispers for your cache of rewards. So it gives you different things to do around the map. And yes, it's the same type of content that Diablo has. It's killing world bosses, events, sellers, dungeons. It's doing those sorts of things. But it's giving you rewards for doing all these types of things in the overland. And if you tie them up with where your nightmare dungeons are, you can kind of double up on a lot of these. So I end up find myself filling up the Tree of Whispers without really focusing on doing Tree of Whispers, because as you're kind of going around through the world, going to different nightmare dungeons and things like that, you're just going to kind of end up doing these things that collect for the Tree of Whispers and filling that up. So I feel that it kind of synergizes with the rest of what's going on, and so it's nice for me. It's a nice change of pace. If I'm getting tired of running nightmare dungeons, I can go around and I can do some Tree of Whispers or something like that. So I think it's a nice little change of pace. And then the other one is, I feel, is very heavily influenced from Diablo 2 Resurrected with their Terror Zones, is the Hell Tides. And that's been really fun. You go through, and there's a little bit more density with mobs. You're getting all of your cinders and everything, and then you can find the chests around through the Helltide location to find your different types of gear that you want to get and spend your cinders for it. So I find Helltides to be a nice change of pace from Nightmare Dungeons as well. And when I see a Helltide come up, it's not necessarily stop everything all at once and go do it, but if I'm not necessarily in the mood for Nightmare Dungeons or want a little bit of a break, it's a nice little change of pace. Go out, run through a little bit through a Helltide, get some cinders, get some gear from those chests and everything. So I think there's a nice little variety of in-game there, and then that hasn't even factored in world bosses, which I actually haven't done yet. In my 100 hours of playtime that I've been playing, I haven't seen a single world boss spawn yet. So I don't know if I'm just on at the wrong times or what, but I have not experienced a world boss yet. But that's content that's there. And then there's the Fields of Hatred for PvP and everything like that as well, which I'm not as much of a PvPer, but the Fields of Hatred do seem kind of fun. As you go through, you get your Seeds of Hatred, and it's a risk reward type system. Do you want to go in and purify your Seeds of Hatred every so often, or do you want to try to hold on to a bunch and do it all at once and everything? So there's a lot of in-game content here, and I think that it's a really good starting base. I don't feel that this game is lacking in in-game content. Now, I do think that there are it's a good foundation to build upon, and by no means do I think this should be the end of in-game content, that this is it and this is the final destination. But I don't think that's where we're at, because the game just released. It's a brand new game. We haven't even hit season 1 yet, so there's going to be more in-game to come to build upon all of this. I think it's a great addition. It's a great foundation for where we're at. And as of right now, I'm not feeling the burnout. I'm not feeling a lack of things to do in game. I'm feeling that there is a lot of stuff for me to do to keep me occupied. And it's just up to me what I'm in the mood for at in any particular session. Now let's go ahead and get to what's probably the most important part of any Diablo game, which is going to be the itemization. And actually, this is the area that I hear a lot about. A lot of people are unhappy with it, not a big fan of it. And I'm not sure exactly why. I guess I kind of get it. I mean, I would probably say that Diablo 2 still has better itemization than Diablo 4. But I think that I disagree with a lot of the complaints that I hear about itemization in D4. I do find it to be pretty important, and I can draw a lot of parallels to D2 itemization. There's still certain stats that you're looking for. So, for example, as a necromancer, I'm looking for intelligence. So I want intelligence improving items. I also, based on my Paragon board, willpower is important. So I might want willpower improving gear. If I want more critical strikes, I'm going to want dexterity gear. If I want more armor to be tankier, I'm going to want strength gear. So I'm going to want to have a focus on all of that, and looking for the items with the right set of skills that I'm looking for. Maybe I see a bonus to additional potions, or a bonus to max evade charges, or something like that, that I'm going to be looking for. And so that, to me, is kind of reminiscent of what I'm looking for in Diablo 2 with bases. I'm going to want bases for my rune words that have the right sets of boosts, whether it be skills or stats or whatever. I'm going to want the bases that have the right stats for me to put my rune words into. And the legendary aspects I kind of look at as the rune words of Diablo 4. When I get a legendary, I'm not necessarily looking at it as, ooh, I can put this legendary on my character. It's not about that. It's about extracting that legendary so I can put it on those bases that I have that are going to boost up what I'm looking for. So, for example, in my specific build, I run Blood Surge and I run Sever. Those are my two main offensive attacks. And I can often find gloves that have one or the other, but maybe not both. Although at one point I think I did have gloves that had both, but I wasn't running both skills at the time, so I ended up dusting them. But now, like, I would want to find gloves that have both of those skills, and those are the gloves that I'm then going to put my legendary aspect on. So until I find that, I'm currently using like some unique gloves that I have. But when I find that base, that rare base that has Blood Surge +2 and Sever +2, that's going to be the gear that I use as my base to put onto my character. And I find myself doing that a lot, whether it's with weapons, armor, whatever the case may be, looking for those base items that have those stats that I'm looking for, and then putting my legendaries on it, the legendaries that I'm going to want for my build. And that feels very reminiscent of what Diablo 2 was. I'm looking for the bases that I want and saving those until I get the rune words, the runes that I'm looking for to make the rune word that I want. Then I make the rune word, and boom, I have these different pieces of of gear with my rune words on them that are making up my build. And so I see it as very similar in Diablo 4. It's just that the specifics are a little bit different. Instead of white bases that I'm going to socket, I'm looking for yellow rare bases with the stats that I want that I might enchant to make move a stat around or something like that, but that's what I'm going to end up putting my legendaries onto. So to me, I feel that it's still pretty similar. So I get the same feeling of the kind of lottery pull and everything like that, the slot machine. I feel that when it comes to getting my gear. It is done a little bit different, I think maybe because there's no identifying anymore. I don't have that moment of using my identify scroll and bringing it over the unique or something and finding out, oh, that's what this is, like blah blah blah, or anything like that. And one thing that I will also say is that, yeah, I would love to see more legendary aspects, and hopefully that's something that gets added on in future seasons and content updates and everything, and I'm sure it will be. But at level 62, I am still finding new aspects that I haven't seen before, but they are fewer and far between. So, for example, in one of my more recent sessions, I found a focus that had a legendary aspect of blood orbs restore essence when I'm at full health. I'd never seen that legendary aspect before on a piece of gear that I had gotten. So, that's still new. I'm still finding newer aspects, which is nice. It gives me hope that there is still new things to look forward to that I haven't encountered yet. But considering the number of repeats that I get, I think it's definitely clear that I've probably at least experienced the majority of what there is so far, which again is fine. The game just came out. I just hope that this isn't the final destination, and I'm sure it's not. As the game goes on and has more and more updates and things like that, I'm sure there will be new legendary aspects. We also have the advantage of looking at 20 years of Diablo expansion. Even now with Diablo 2 Resurrected, it's still being updated with new rune words and things like that. So there is a lot more content in Diablo 2. There is a lot more variety in the gear in Diablo 2 because it's a 20-year-old game compared to a game that's less than a month old. So I think it's a very good foundation, again, as what most of the game is. I would hope that it's not the final destination, and I'm sure that it won't be. But itemization wise, while yes, there is a little bit more variety from Diablo 2, and I think that whole slot machine vibe hits a little bit harder in Diablo 2 than it does in Diablo 4. For me at least, it's still there. I'm still looking every time I pick up a rare or a legendary. I'm looking at what are these stats on it. Does it have what I'm looking for? Is it something that I can save for later use if I get the right aspect or something? Or is it something that I just want to dust because it's not worth anything? I'll just get the components for it. So I think that same vibe is there that we all play these Diablo games for with the itemization. So I personally am happy with the itemization, and I'll be looking forward to see what more continues to be added as the game goes forward and how they continue to expand upon that. And lastly, I'm going to go ahead and get into the story. I said that story was probably the least important thing to me when I'm rating a game and deciding how I feel about it. And that's no different here, especially in a Diablo game where we're not really playing it for the story. I don't think a Diablo game has ever had some kind of wow, super amazing story. But it is still a part of the game experience nonetheless. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the story now. And the other reason why I saved the story until now is also because if you guys do not want spoilers, if you want to avoid spoilers, now's the time to go ahead and dip out. You guys overall already know how I feel about Diablo 4 as a whole, that I really like it. I still think I like Diablo 2 better, but I really like Diablo 4. I've already talked about my background with Diablo. I've talked about the gameplay, skill trees, Paragon boards, 1 through 50, in-game itemization. So the last thing I am going to talk about is the story. So if you would like to avoid spoilers, now's a good time to go ahead and dip out. You've gotten the rest of the information that I'm giving in this video, so you won't be missing anything else. But if you are okay with spoilers, or you've played through the game already or whatever, then go ahead and stick around, and I'm going to be finishing up with my views on the story. So, generally speaking, I do think it's easy to say that this is the best story a Diablo game has ever had. Now, I also think that's a low bar, so I don't think that that's necessarily an accomplishment, but I do think it is the best story, and I do think that that's worth something. I think it goes without saying that this game has the best cinematics the Diablo series has ever had. And honestly, maybe even includes some of my favorite cinematics that I've ever seen in a game, period. So I really did like the cinematics in this game. Some of the ones that stood out to me are when you try the lotus petals inside the obviously the battle in hell, with Darius and Lilith, and then the carnage of angels facing off against the demon, and you have Reverend Mother Prava there, and she's doing her whole bowing in front of the spears as they go by and slay all the fallen and monsters and stuff. I thought that stuff was really well done. I also am a sucker for the fan service, so seeing characters like Andariel, Duriel make their returns, and especially Mephisto, to me, I enjoyed that. That stuff spoke to me. It was some familiarity from beloved games of the past and connecting it all together. In fact, one joke that I made is when you get to the point of where in storyline the character, you don't get this choice as a player, but where the character is, who's telling the truth between Mephisto and between Lilith, I made the joke of, I got history with Mephisto. This is my guy. We've been going back and forth with this for years, referencing all the Mephisto runs that we've done and everything. So it was nice little kind of moment for me as a fan to go ahead and be able to enjoy that. There were some kind of WTF moments within the storyline, like with Donan getting killed kind of randomly, and I guess apparently there was supposed to be a hidden meaning behind it, where the monster that killed him was like representative of his son or something, but I feel like the story didn't really express that, if that's what they were going for. And if that's not what they were going for, it was kind of an anticlimactic way to just kind of kill him off. And then obviously the storyline, that the epilogue actually, or prologue, I'm sorry, is setting up the future content, the future storyline, with Nirel running off with the Soul Stone, and Mephisto following her and talking about him and his brothers. So we know now that the trio from Diablo 2 is probably what's going to be coming back in the expansions and DLCs. So we're going to get to fight Diablo and Baal and Mephisto again. So for myself as a fan of Diablo 2, I'm kind of excited for that. Now, storyline wise, was it kind of, forced or whatever? Yeah, a little bit. But as from a gameplay perspective, I'm excited to be facing off against those bosses again. And so that's going to be something I look forward to in the DLC, to face off against those prime evils. Overall, I thought that Lilith was well done as a character, but I've seen some people talk about that she's kind of a behind the scenes villain, and you don't really get any any anything real from her until later on in the storyline. And I kind of agree with that because it's not that there was any secret as to her motivations or anything, but it's just like we saw an isolated incident here or there, like with the priest and stuff, of what her threat to Sanctuary actually was. But I felt so much of it was implied. It was almost like they told instead of showing. And so, as an observer of the storyline, I never really felt connected to Lilith's threat to Sanctuary. It's just more along the lines of being told, oh, this is the big bad that we need to kill, but not really being shown why, except for a few smaller, isolated incidents that definitely did show her to be bad, but not necessarily this whole world consuming threat or anything like that. And in past Diablo games, obviously there's really none of this either because the story is so minimal and everything. I think about Diablo 2 and what storyline is there that we see for Baal or Mephisto or Diablo or anything. But again, those games, while they did have a storyline and there were cinematics and stuff, they weren't so heavily in, it wasn't such a emphasis as it is in Diablo 4. So in Diablo 2, I play and I see the cutscenes between acts, but within the acts themselves, it's just going through and playing. It just, the story serves the gameplay. Whereas with Diablo 4, it's definitely intended to be much more story driven than past Diablos. And so for that, I think there's a lot actually missing from the story to make it actually really kind of connect with me as a what's the viewer at this point. The other thing is from a gameplay perspective, I thought the storyline was good. I enjoyed playing through it. I thought from a gameplay perspective, I was engaged in what I was doing. It was fun. It kept me interested until we get to about Act 5 or so. And maybe it's because I kind of hit the point where I was like, okay, I'm getting close now. I'm at a high level. I want to get to this end game stuff, so I want to get through this story. But Act 5 just dragged on and on and on. And it just felt like the entire storyline of Act 5 was I need to meet a character at such and such a location. I go meet them there, and then they say, oh, wait, we don't have what we need. You need to go back to the other location and get what we need, and then I go back over there and get what I need there, and then I need to go back, and it was just so much back and forth that I felt was not necessary. I didn't feel that so much in the other acts. I mean, there is a lot of go from point A to point B in the other acts, but Act 5 it felt magnified where it was just go back, go back, go back, go back, go back, and it was just like, okay, can we just actually push forward with the storyline now? And so it felt like it was unnecessarily and artificially dragged out to make the storyline longer when it didn't necessarily need it to be. They probably could have cut out most of Act 5 and wouldn't have really missed a thing. That being said, by the time you get back into Act 6, I was thoroughly engaged again. And I felt that it did a really good job of capturing my attention. So, all in all, it's definitely the best storyline that I've played in a Diablo game. Now that I have the option to skip it, will I go back and play through it again? Probably not, because I'm the kind of player that, like I've said before, I don't particularly care about storylines. I just want to get in and do what I want to do in these games. And so a lot of times I skip campaigns to just get into the kind of content that I want to do. And in Diablo, that's going through dungeons and killing a bunch of monsters. So will I do that storyline again? Probably not. I'll probably be skipping it every alt character I make, every seasonal character I make, all that sort of thing. But for the time that I played it, it was fun, and I enjoyed the campaign more than I thought that I would, Act 5 notwithstanding. So those are my feelings about Diablo 4. Again, as I said earlier, I do think it's a great game. I don't know that it's necessarily my favorite of the franchise, but I do think that it's among my favorite games of this console generation. Maybe my favorite game of this console generation, and yes, that does include Elden Ring, which I did think was a great game. I don't think it's the greatest thing of all time that it can be made out to be sometimes, but I do think that it was a great game. But personal preference wise, I may even prefer Diablo 4 to that. It's at least close. Elden Ring was pretty good, so I don't know for sure that I would say Diablo 4 is better, but it's at least a discussion for me. But either way, the whole point is that I do think Diablo 4 is a great game. I think it's one of the best games that's come out on this console generation, and I can see myself putting this game as a main game in my rotation. Something that I probably am not going to play every season, of course, but I will come back to and have a great time with it. So I will be playing season one. Before then, I may go ahead and make some of my alts. Like I really want to make a druid. I really want to make a sork. So I might make those before I get into the season. Because I do plan on playing another necromancer for season one. So I might want to kind of break up the necromancer monotony a little bit before I get into the first season. But I think it's a great game with a great foundation, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it continues to grow as time goes on. Is it a perfect game? No, it's not. I do think that there are some areas for improvement. I do think there's a lot of areas where I still think that Diablo 2 is the better of the games in the franchise. I don't have a lot of experience with PoE, so I don't feel experienced enough to be able to compare it to PoE or some of the other ARPGs that are out there, at least some of the bigger name ones. I can only really compare it to previous Diablo games. And when it comes to the Diablo franchise as a whole, I would probably say Diablo 2 is number one, Diablo 4 is number two, Diablo 3 is number three, and that's not a low ranking for me. I actually hold Diablo 3 in high regards. And then Diablo 1 is probably my least favorite. Personal preference, really. I do understand that it was big time for the genre and video games in general. I recognize its impact and its importance, but personal preference, I've even gone back more recently and tried to play it, and whether it was when it first came out or now, it's just something that I have a really hard time getting into. So I don't think Diablo 1 is really the game for me, but of the three that I do enjoy, and I highly enjoy all three, I would rank them Diablo 2, Diablo 4, Diablo 3. But thanks for joining me. This is my first time doing a review, so I hope that if people were looking in terms of what Diablo 4 has to offer, I hope that this was beneficial to you. I know I've had a great time playing it, and I'm looking forward to a lot more time in Diablo 4. So until next time, this is Execution 99, checking out.